Hello everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Wonder Woman. This was directed by Patty Jenkins. I wasn't at all interested in this movie until about a week ago. I really don't know anything about Wonder Woman, but the idea of having a female superhero, a compelling female superhero, is something that we just haven't seen, unfortunately, in the movies, and the fact that it was directed by a woman really intrigued me. But looking at her overall career, Patty Jenkins has never really given us any indication that she was cut out to make some sort of huge CGI-based studio film, because her main claim to fame was back in 2003, I believe, and that was with Monster. And that was a really kind of small, character-driven piece. And that's where Patty Jenkins' talent lies, I think. She shows her strengths and weaknesses with Wonder Woman. She shows that she is really good with the character work, with building the characters. But in terms of the actual action and all of that, not so great. This film has a lot of weaknesses, and it does have strengths also. But this movie is very entertaining. It is a lot of fun, despite how uneven it is. The word that keeps coming to my mind when I think about this movie is charming. It's just charming. It charmed me all the way through. Enough to where I was able to overlook a lot of the issues I had with it. Anytime I would have an issue with maybe like plot contrivances or, something being really unrealistic or stupid, because this movie is very cornball, schmaltzy, it just had this ability. The movie would just kind of take me by the waist and whisper sweet nothings in my ear, and I would just be like, okay. It would woo me and I would just give in. So this is Wonder Woman's origin story, and it begins when she's a child, when she's Princess Diana of the Amazons, and it goes through all of her training to become this great warrior, when she would eventually become Wonder Woman. And the film begins on this kind of paradise island that she lives on with the rest of the Amazon women. But her call to adventure comes when she saves the life of this American pilot, played by Chris Pine, who is a spy in World War I. That's when the film takes place. Diana decides to leave her home and fight alongside him in the hopes that they can both end the war and save humanity. As I said at the beginning, this film does do really well with characters. Gal Gadot, who plays Wonder Woman, she's pretty good. I think she does have that kind of charismatic star quality. She's got a sort of spirited freshness and a naivete that is very appealing and definitely serves the character, because she is a naive character who is learning all of these things for the first time. She carries the movie well, and I like that she has a very definitive arc, that her character begins with a sort of moral compass and a sense of what she wanted to do, what she wanted to carry out, and that definitely changes over time. By the end of the film, she's definitely a different character. And my favorite part of the film was both she and Chris Pine together, because they have really, really great chemistry. I think that Chris Pine is just, he was meant to be a star. He's really charismatic. He is very, very charming, and he has great comedic timing. You really root for them both. You care about what happens to them, which is more than I can say for a lot of superhero films that I've seen in the past. I know that sounds like a given. That sounds like screenwriting 101, but you'd be surprised. That does not happen as often as you'd think. The feminist aspects of this film are handled really well. I think that with Wonder Woman, she is that juxtaposition, and you can play up whatever side you want depending on the incarnation, but she's often either seen as this very strong, powerful warrior, more rarely I'd say, but she was more kind of seen as that 1940s pinup girl of the superheroes. And I think that they found a nice balance, because they did really show that she is strong, that she's powerful, and that she is a somewhat interesting character. But she's also sexy, and not in an objectified way. She's sexy in the way that she chooses to be. And that's something that I really like to see. And I also really like that this film was set in London in World War I, because that does allow her to be exposed to a lot of the gender stereotypes of the time. And not just her. A lot of the kind of the allies, the characters that come in later, kind of the small side characters, you get to see how many of them are compromised based on their race or, again, their gender. And all of that is very relevant in the modern day. But this film does have a message, and it's a muddled message, and a lot of that has to do with the execution, particularly in the third act of the film, but I'll get to that later. The point, though, is that there's at least an attempt by the writers here to at least expose a lot of the gray areas and the flawed parts of human nature. No matter how hard you try, you just can't save everybody. And I think there are definitely very strong correlations between Wonder Woman and also like Clark Kent becoming Superman, the burden of responsibility sort of storyline. But the way that the film goes about trying to convey that point at the end of the film, it didn't work for me. It felt very tacked on. It felt very sloppy. And I know that I say this, I feel like I say this all the time. My criticism is always, oh, I have an issue with the third act. But I mean, unfortunately, that's just, third acts are really hard to write. It's hard to sum everything up in a way that doesn't feel forced. And a lot of these superhero films, the bigger films, just don't know how to handle that very well. I'm going to try really hard here to not give away too much. I want to avoid spoilers for the most part, but I'll just say that they really tried to raise the stakes to very monumental levels. The villain in the film is very uninteresting, and it felt as though they were just there to sort of be the fireworks when it needed to be there, and also to hammer in this point of view, this ethical point of view about humanity that was just really puzzling. I think I know what they were going for. It just was really poorly executed. The third act just felt almost like a completely different film. It didn't gel with the first half of it, or the first two acts, I should say. It was like they were saying, okay, now we need to really make sure that we end this with a bang and make it feel like it's much more part of the DC universe. And as though they were really trying to hammer in the influence of Zack Snyder, which I never was a fan of Zack Snyder. I think this movie was doing just fine without all of that. It did not need some poorly written villain to sort of strain Diana's character arc into something large in scope and ultimately simplistic in meaning. I actually think that Diana learning about humans through all of her little character interactions and during the Test Allies and Enemies period was far more compelling. And I think the reason for that is because this movie just has more of a heart. It has more of an emotional center, but it's also kind of teetering between, should we stick to that or should we become that big Zack Snyder movie? But in doing so, it doesn't feel genuine, so it comes off as kind of tired. I think I would have preferred for the first battle sequence that took place in the trenches to become the climactic point. I mean, if you kind of tweak the narrative here and there, I think it could have worked because it felt more earned. It built very nicely. It was very empowering for her. And I mean, just in terms of that itself, that worked much better than some big, gigantic ending where the climax kind of mars the film's focus. And that trenches sequence is probably the only action sequence I liked. Patty Jenkins, she's just not very good at action stuff. It had kind of a video game quality. It felt like kind of CGI overload, and it made the action sequences look just kind of cheap overall. And tonally too, I think that this film was really one note when she enters London, when she enters the World War. I like that the film doesn't shy away from the horrors of war and does make it feel very grim, but the film's message is to show the complexity of humans, that humans are barbaric, yet we do have redeeming qualities. And I would have liked to see that represented better just in the aesthetic of the film. Visually, I think it just needed more contrast. But yeah, I mean, you know, even though I have a lot of issues with this movie, I can't deny that I had a really good time. I smiled throughout. I was really energized watching it. It was refreshing to see a big summer movie, especially a DC movie, really put thought into the characters, and for me to feel emotionally invested in something like that is kind of rare. So I gotta give credit where credit is due. So I will give this a recommendation. It's a good time. And that's my review. Thank you all for listening. All my social media information is down there. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.